Hello again, everybody. We're going to have ourselves a fun little talk today about John Watson and his influence on psychology, and we're going to get to talk about scaring little children. Woo! No, don't tell anybody I said that one, all right? All right. Now, John Watson was an interesting character. He worked with a lot of different people. He worked with a guy named Jacques Loeb, and Jacques Loeb was actually an ethologist who studied animals. He had some very interesting things that he studied. He studied how stimuli in the environment can trigger responses in an organism. It was very straightforward. Let's say at its simplest extreme, a reflex would be hit your knee with a rubber hammer and your knee goes up. Lovely. At a much more extreme, migration, for example, would be as the world gradually, as the temperature gradually goes down and the days get shorter, it triggers this behavior. But I mean, the idea being that these complex behaviors could be triggered by external cues, and you didn't need any complex mental events to explain it. There was just no mental events required, and so he moved over to John Hopkins, and I think I might have told you this, that the guy in charge, Baldwin, got caught in the brothel. You're out, Baldwin. He gets a job, and he gets the editor of the journal Psychological Review. So he's the editor, and he publishes this, even though it was pretty obvious that people thought it was a stupid thing. Psychology, as a behaviorist views it, it's objective, experimental branch. He pissed off everybody with this. The only person he didn't upset with this was Titchener, in fact. Titchener was okay with it, and it was kind of an odd thing, by the way. There was multiple points in history here where Titchener and Watson actually got along, because Watson used Titchener's textbooks. Turns out later on Watson is going to get fired from his job, and he's going to need a letter of recommendation, and the only letter he can get is Titchener. Well, here's another one where Titchener was the only psychologist that wasn't upset by what Watson said here with this psychology as a behaviorist views it, because as far as Titchener said was, I have no problem, because what John Watson here is laying out is what I would call, according to Titchener anyway, he would call a technology of behavior. Therefore, what Watson was studying did not interfere with what Titchener was doing, the real experimental psychology. So what does he care? Potato, potato. Call it psychology if you want, but it's a technology of behavior, says Titchener. Okay? So, as we said, Watson's approach was very similar to the Russian objective psychology, but Watson did not care about the brain. As you recall, Pavlov was first and foremost a physiologist, and therefore he was very interested in the brain mechanisms, if you recall, that the brain mechanisms in associationism. And if you recall, say for example, the cortical mosaic that he laid out and the brain patterns that were activated when it was quite a fascinating thing. But John Watson says, I don't care. You know what? The brain is a black box. Anytime somebody uses the brain, what they're doing is they're just saying, I don't know. Okay, therefore a miracle happens or something. And at this point in history, with the knowledge of the brain that was going on, people did use the brain as sort of like and then a miracle happened. So it was kind of a cheat or something. And Watson said, I don't care. I mean, I don't care what's going on. I just care about the externally measurable behavior. Okay? And so he writes a full book, Psychology from the Standpoint of a Behaviorist, and here he completely pulls apart what he means. He says, stimulus response psychology. He says, okay, as I might have told you in a previous previous presentation, I don't remember. The doorbell rings, my dog gets excited and happy, and he runs to the door and wags his tail. And Watson would get, okay. We can measure the stimulus, doorbell rings. We can measure the responses, wagging tail and walk to door. But all of that excited and happy stuff that you just talked about, that's out. Okay? We don't do that stuff. That's no good. We just talk stimuli in the environment, responses of the organism. Okay? And the goal of psychology is to predict and control behavior. That's it. Okay, and we're going to talk about how Watson moved this forward into behavioral therapy, which is the ultimate control of behavior. All right, so behaviors could be all kinds. They could be implicit behaviors and explicit behaviors. It could be learned behaviors. It could be unlearned behaviors. All right, explicit behaviors are external. Implicit behaviors are internal. External, internal, whatever. So explicit learned behaviors are like talking and walking, whereas explicit unlearned behaviors would be like grasping, blinking, and sneezing, almost like reflexes. Implicit learned behaviors would be like when you see the dentist drill, your heart rate goes up or something. And implicit unlearned behaviors would be like changes in your circulation in response to temperature or something. So he felt these were all behaviors and they were all subject to. Remember, stimulus response. When I say stimulus response, what I mean is response equals behavior, and only behavior can be studied. Okay? So here's a little quote of his. He, in fact, very interesting. Saying is doing, that is behaving. Speaking overtly or to ourselves is just as objective a type of behavior as baseball. All right. He had some very freaky views on what language was. This idea. See, he it was a little bit weird. I mean, definitely, once we get to Skinner's version of behaviorism, this is gone. This is completely gone. But Watson had this belief that the cognition, thinking and cognitive processes, was really the result of talking to yourself. And since talking is a behavior, a behavior which can be studied. Even though you've internalized that that's what Watson felt was that when children are first learning a complicated task, they talk to themselves, then they're told, no, you don't talk to yourself. So instead they start to just move their lips, and then later on they internalize it. So for him, thinking was internalized speech, and since speech is a behavior, you could study thinking in the way that it was internalized speech. Kind of an odd way to approach it, but it was his solution to the problem. So he proposed what he called radical environmentalism, and it was his belief that all human behavior is caused by environmental triggers. So he's got himself this incredibly long quote, but it's a fairly famous one. He says, give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed in my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee you to take any one at random and train him to become any type of scientist, specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant chief, and yes, even beggar man and thief. Regardless of his penchants and tendencies, blah, 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 blah. So it goes on, and what he basically is saying is, the ultimate John Locke thing, the ultimate tabula rasa. When a kid is born, they got nothing. They are nothing but the product of the experiences of the life of the world that they grow up in. It's pretty extreme. Okay. All right, give me a break here, guys. I'll figure out which slides I'm on. Here. So now, along with the traditional reflexes, in fact, like the Pavlovian type reflexes on which we build all associations. Remember, Pavlov said, put a meat in the dog's mouth and they drool. That's the unlearned reflex, or unconditioned reflex, rather. And these unconditioned reflex through the processes of association become associated with other things, and now a bell leads to drooling, okay? And so, anyway, these reflexes, these same kinds of reflexes that Pavlov has as his primary thing, John Watson also said that they have the emotions of fear, rage, and love. He said, with an infant, you don't have to teach them. Just like in reflexes, you don't have to teach the dog. You put the meat in your mouth and, oh, now you're supposed to drool, dog. No, the dog knows this. And it's the same thing. If you scare loud noises, and infants will elicit the emotional reaction of fear without being taught. And if you restrict their movement, then they get rage. And if you stroke them and pat them, then they elicit love. So these are the three emotions that John Watson said children are born with that they do not need to learn. So in that sense, they are similar to the role of the reflexes in the Pavlovian sense. That is, they are the building blocks upon which the laws of association will then build something more complex. So now, through learning, these emotions come to be elicited by other stimuli as well. Not a surprise. Just like through learning, the dog drools after it hears a bell, right? Through learning, these reflexes come to be elicited by other stimuli. So, originally it was food drool, now it's bell drool. So it's the same concept, but now it's substitute emotions. So in a classic study, here's what he did. He did crazy. Here's a little picture of John Watson with a little rabbit mask and stuff. Well, here's what he does, okay? This is a really cool little study, okay? So as we already said, there's an unlearned reflex here. Loud noises make kids afraid. So little baby Albert is just sitting there, just playing along, nothing's happening. And so you sneak up behind little baby Albert with a great big, see what Watson did was he used a big metal bar and a hammer, and he'd sneak up by, he didn't hit the kid in the head, all right? Get it out of your head right now. He snuck up behind him and he, dong, little this kid Albert, baby Albert, just screams. He's just out of control, scared. All right, cool. Let Albert calm down. This is an unlearned reflex. Albert did not have to learn that loud sound leads to fear. So now here's what he does. He brings in a little rat, a little white rat. And little baby Albert is so happy. He's just, oh, he loves to play with the rat. It is such an awesome rat. It's just so cuddly and diggly. So now, Albert's playing with the rat, having a great time. Watson sneaks up behind him. Dong! And Albert, why does Albert scream his ass off? Because the unlearned emotional reflex of loud noises leads to scared, right? And so the rat was just something stuck at the beginning. This is just like in Pavlov's bell, meat, drool. Bell, meat, drool. If you remember in the process of acquisition, bell, meat, drool. Bell was the conditioned stimulus, or more specifically in Pavlovian terms, the bell was a neutral stimulus. The rat was a neutral stimulus to begin with. It didn't particularly have meaning. In fact, it had positive value, if anything. It didn't have particular meaning, though. But it was this unlearned reflex which did already have meaning, or didn't have to be taught. After doing this about 5 times, bringing out the rat, Albert plays with the rat, dong. Now, eventually, bring out the rat, and Albert's like, oh no, I am not sticking around. He's gone. He screams as soon as the rat comes out, man. He is so deathly afraid of this rat. So that's something. So now John Watson has established, like he said at the beginning, a child has simple associations. Loud noise leads to fear. This is unlearned, and that's not an association, unlearned. And so what happens is that through the process of association with other stimuli, this original reflex-like emotional reaction then gets triggered by other stimuli, in this case a rat. Well, it turns out that not only did Albert get afraid of the rat, but Albert also got afraid of other stimuli, like a white rabbit. A white rabbit comes out, and Albert screams. I mean, here's a picture of my poor daughter, and the Easter Bunny is scaring her. All right, whatever. But there was other things that scared Albert too, and it was such a sad thing because you know what scared Albert was Santa Claus. Yeah, Santa Claus, man. Buffalo the bird. And so poor Albert's crying to Santa Claus. Oh my God, you stole his Santa Claus. All right. So, as I was saying earlier, it comes back to behavioral therapy, okay? That what happened was, according to John Watson, he felt that, look, almost every bad behavior, and see, well, in fact, here, I'll take a step back historically. John Watson's plan was to show that he could create this fear in baby Albert, okay? And then he was going to continue working with baby Albert to remove that fear. Okay, he was going to counter condition it out. Well, it turns out, though, Albert's mother takes him out of the hospital, and I mean, he's gone. And in fact, one of the biggest mysteries in psychology is called Whatever Happened to Baby Albert, and nobody really knows what happened to Baby Albert. He's gone. Well, John Watson then gets a hold of this other kid, Peter. He's this 3-year-old boy who's got this intense fear of rats, rabbits, fur coats, frog, fish, mechanical toys. He's afraid of everything. Okay, so John Watson's got this kid who's already afraid of stuff. And now, you'd have to assume that just like baby Albert, Peter had some experiences in his lifetime that led to these fears, okay? I don't know what they were. It doesn't matter what they were, is really what John Watson says. He says, here's the deal behind behavioral therapy. Anything that has been learned, including these fears, can be unlearned. Okay, so he proceeds to create, he works with Mary Cover Jones, no, who does he work with? I forgot her name, Mary something or another. He marries this girl in the end, by the way. Did I tell you this? He married one of his students, Mary Ix. I think his first wife was Mary Ix, and what happens is, Mary Ix was his student, and during an exam, Apparently, Mary Hicks writes a love poem to John Watson. End of the exam, he's like, okay, we got to turn in papers, and she doesn't. She's all, oh, he insists you have to turn in your exam. She turns it in, runs out of the room. It's a love poem. He marries her. Meanwhile, now they're married for 10, 15 years, something, 20 years. Now he works with this Mary, I think it's Mary Cover, is it Mary Cover Jones? I can't remember. It's underneath my face here in the bottom corner. I can't read it. But anyway, he marries her, and divorces his wife, and it was this event that really kicked him out of academia. And when he lost his job in academia, what happened was, as I said, Titchener was the only one that would write him a letter of recommendation, and he actually moved into some very interesting things. Once he left the realm of academia, he moved into advertising, and then more specifically, he moved into child rearing practices. And in fact, John Watson and his wife Mary here, I think it's Mary, whatever. Anyway, his wife here, they wrote I mean, anybody that's ever had a child, I mean, the current book, as far as I know, at least it was when I was growing up, was called What to Expect When You're Expecting. And then the child rearing book before that was Dr. Spock. But the child rearing book before Dr. Spock was actually Watson's book. So that was the book for, a whole generation. I guess our grandparents, right? Grandparents used that book to raise their children. And so here's the deal. There was a lot of different things. What they did was, he tried to remove the fear from Peter. So he took little kids and he had them playing with rabbits and toys and everything like that. And Peter's fear was starting to diminish. It was through modeling, right? Through modeling, showing other children playing with his feared objects without displaying fear, right? So everything was going good. Peter gets scarlet fever, goes to the hospital. On the way back from the hospital, boom, gets attacked by a dog, and everything comes back twice as bad as it was, okay? So here's what Watson's got now. He's got Peter again with even worse problems than he started with. And so what he did was he set Peter up. In fact, Peter's favorite lunch was peanut butter sandwiches. And so they would put Peter in this big, long room. Big, long, almost like a hallway. And Peter's eating lunch, and down at the very end, there was a rabbit in a cage. And Peter at first is like, okay, this is just freaking me out, But after a while, he's like, it is really 40 feet away, and it's in a cage, okay? And so every day, as Peter's eating his lunch in this hallway, they bring the cage another couple of feet closer, right? And eventually, it gets to the point where Peter's able to eat his sandwich while petting the rabbit with his other hand, and he's okay, all right? And the point being, anything that can be learned can be unlearned, okay? So John Watson felt that you are not a complicated creature. There's no magic going on inside of you. You are the product of learned associations. Okay, so this is where behaviorism was going, and I believe we're going to talk some B.F. Skinner coming up in the next presentation. All right, so I'll see you then.